later today in one of our conversations. But there are a couple of really cool prizes. So check that out, scan those QR codes. And now I am going to invite ANAD's program director, Jen Carroll, and Jennifer Anderson on our virtual stage here. Let me get them set up. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, take it away, Jen.
All right, thank you. Hi, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be here today to talk about how we can promote healthy eating and positive relationship with food and body image in kids. Again, Kristen said, but I'm Jen Carroll. I'm ANAD's programs director, and I'm also a parent. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been a longtime follower of yours. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you, Jennifer, and read your bio. So Jennifer Anderson is a mom of two, registered dietitian, and has a master's of science in public health from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. In 2019, she founded Kids Eat in Color, a resource for families seeking evidence-based information and strategies on child nutrition and feeding. Prior to starting Kids Eat in Color, she coordinated youth nutrition programs at a food bank, performed research in urban food deserts, and consulted for the USDA National Office SNAP Ed program. Her academic background is in public health nutrition, cultural anthropology, and economics. Welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So just to kick it off, can you talk a little bit about Kids Eat in Color and how you got started?
Sure. So I'm a dietitian, and before I had kids, I was a dietitian. And when I had my first son, he was cute and chubby. His cheeks were like so kissable. And I brought him into his 9-month appointment at the pediatrician, and she said, he's not gaining weight. And in that moment, I just felt like such a failure. I mean, didn't he know he was supposed to be a good eater? I'm a dietitian, you're supposed to eat well.
Right.
Kids, they don't care what you do for your work. But at that point, I was like, okay, this is a different ball game. And I really focused on child feeding, learning as much as I could. And then when my second son came along, he was really showing the signs of becoming a more extreme picky eater. And so I just began to live this very, focused lifestyle and helping my kids get what they needed. And fast forward, my first son is 3. And I thought, you know what? I can't be the only parent having a hard time. And this is like my area of expertise, and I'm having a hard time. So at that point, I started an Instagram account so that I could share what I knew with other parents and feel less alone and help them have less stress. And that is where Kids Eat in Color started. And now it's become what it is now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you for that. And it's true, our kids don't care what we do for a living, and they're going to be their own people. And part of the joy and stress of parenting is like navigating that with them along the way. And we hear from so many parents that, their priority is to promote healthy eating and healthy body image, and they really want to do this and they want to do a good job. But there's so much information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it can become overwhelming. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what are some of the common misconceptions that parents have about even what it means to promote healthy eating or feed your kids in a healthy way?
I think the number one misconception is that there is one right or best way to feed your child. It puts a lot of pressure on us, and it really sets us up for failure when we believe there's only one right way to wean your baby onto solid foods, or to feed your preschooler, or to get your kids eating veggies. And we really need to get away from that idea and embrace the idea that we have to learn what we need to feed our child, because they are their own person. And so when we then take this perspective away from, oh, I have to do this best thing, to I have to really watch and learn and listen to my child, then it eases some of the pressure on us, because we're like, oh, you know what? Actually, sometimes we can eat in front of the TV and it's absolutely fine for my child. Or maybe it's even helpful in some cases, where, the public health recommendation is, don't eat in front of the TV as often as you can. So I think that's really the mindset that we really need to go into when we're feeding our kids is how can I be curious and listen to my own child and to what they might need in the moment.
Yeah, and to be flexible too. And this really ties into conversations we have in the eating disorder field all the time about things not being so black and white in our thinking about what's right or wrong or healthy or unhealthy, what have you. So thank you for sharing that. And, what are some of the main ways that you do think that parents can foster? I know it's like a big question, it's a general question, but can foster a positive relationship with food. Maybe we could start with mealtime since we were kind of on that already.
Well, I mean, like I said, not eating in front of a screen, that's good. But I think family meals is something to keep in mind. So if we can have a calm, somewhat peaceful meal, now we're dealing with kids here, right? So I say calm and peaceful in quotes because children are at the meal and there's going to be messes and tantrums and like all that stuff. But if we can mostly come to that meal in a relatively regulated state ourselves and they're mostly positive, then those family meals can be helpful for several reasons. One is they're watching you eat or another adult or caregiver. My definition of a family meal is one adult with a child where they're sharing food. May or may not be the exact same food. And so that modeling is going to be really important. You don't have to do family meals to be able to feed your child well, but you get a couple things in this package of family meals. You get the modeling, you get food exposure, and you also get some sort of like routine. And then you also get kids ideally sitting, right? So like sitting and a little bit more regulated. You could do these things outside of a family meal, obviously, but family meals can be really helpful for that purpose. But also fun. I mean, that's the other piece of this. If nothing else, like be a little more relaxed, have fun with those moments where you can pick up the broccoli and sing into it like it's a microphone and pretend the peas are, little green people. And, this sort of thing, especially for the younger kids, but even as they get older, these sorts of games and fun things really, really are powerful. I mean, my kids still eat broccoli because we started playing this game where we pretended there was a bird in their little tree. And we would pretend like, oh, do you hear the birdie in my tree? And then we would eat the broccoli and then they would think it was funny. And then they did it. And that's morphed into 20 questions like, what thing is in my tree? And, I have a 9 and 11-year-old and they are still playing this game of what's in my broccoli tree, which is amazing to me just because it's fun and it's a connection point for us.
It's so important just to set that relaxing environment. And I'll get to asking about folks in our recovery who, or our community rather, who are pursuing their own recovery. But having that structure in place and then being able to relax within the, the structure that you've already set. We do family games at my house too. And so now when the kids are sitting down to dinner, they're saying, I get to pick game today. And it's like they know that it's coming and that we're going to have a nice relaxed dinner. And that's been helpful for us. So, yeah. So we try our best to model this at home. And then inevitably, there are times where our kids are not with us, that they get exposed to diet culture, or maybe they are with us and they get exposed to diet culture. I'd love if you can talk about how you navigate that. Like, say you're with extended family, for example, that we get asked about that a lot. Or even I know, like, when my kids started to learn to read and suddenly it was like it opened them up to this whole other world of labels and messaging. How do you approach that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is beginning like before they can read, because the reading love that they can read, but also it opens up, their nutrition facts panel and the weight stigma in books and like all sorts of things. I think stepping back to a little bit before that and back to what you said about not thinking black and white, the way that I kind of think of it is there is a rainbow of color in between black and white. And if we can stay in that rainbow, we can find solutions. We can have more flexibility in our thinking about food. And so if you can get them a little bit into this mindset of like, yeah, it's not that foods are healthy, but it's like how you eat them. And I like to say, well, what would happen if you only ate broccoli? I've yet to meet a kid who's like, oh, that sounds great. No, they're like, I don't think I'd feel good if I only ate broccoli. And then you can also ask them, what would happen if you only ate cookies? And I've also yet to come across a child who's like, that would be great. I would feel good. Now they're like, oh, that doesn't sound right either. And so by asking questions like this, building up to those conversations that they're going to be exposed to, I think the more they can hear those conversations and think, okay, but also I have another framework in my mind. So kids are in that developmental stage, especially ages 3, 4, 5, 6, where they are really learning to categorize everything. And they're going to have a lot of categories. And one that they're going to be exposed to, whether we like it or not, is healthy and unhealthy foods.
Sure.
Right? We can't stop them from being exposed to that, but we can give them another framework that they can also use. And so they're like, okay, well, there's this healthy, unhealthy framework out there, but there's also this framework that says, oh, a food is only unhealthy if you're eating only that food. It's more complicated. Sure. And I've seen my kids kind of develop this. So when my son came home and was like, oh, my classmate said that chocolate is bad, he was already thinking, well, we don't talk about foods as good or bad at home. And so we could have a conversation. Well, what would happen if you only ate chocolate? It would be bad. And what would happen if you only ate broccoli? Well, that would also be bad. And so, every year he's come home with something from school. Now, when it gets to adults, I think it's a little more tricky, especially relatives and holidays where people are talking about their diets and they're talking about their weight loss or attempted weight loss or lack of weight loss or we've heard it. We're like, okay, can we just not? I think there's two things. One, in the moment, it's really hard to know what to say. I certainly have not come up with brilliant things to say in the moment. So if something comes up and I can't react, which is almost always, I would then have a conversation later if my kids seem to be paying attention. Like, oh, did you hear what she said? What do you think she meant by that? Or, oh, it's interesting that she said that negative thing about her body. If my child is interested and seems to be engaged,
right?
Sometimes we just let it go, right? But I think also taking opportunities to then teach kids positive ways of looking at their body, where we're getting away from shape and size. That's like the number one, right? We're not talking about people's body sizes, not our own, not their. We're not talking about body shape, whether it's big or small. Like, we're just not doing that. We have the rule, like, you're not allowed to talk about somebody else's body to them or comment on it unless, you've asked them or they've asked or something like that, So, and I think the other key is really to call ahead. Like, call grandma on the phone. Hey, grandma, please do not talk about your diet around Johnny. And I know this can be really, I say it like as if it's easy to call up grandma and ask her not to say anything about her diet around your child. It's not. None of this is easy. And I think sometimes as parents, we just have to say, okay, I'm going to do this really hard, awkward thing, and grandma may be really angry at me. And I still have to do it. Like, sometimes we still have to do those really, really hard things. And I think calling ahead, you can decide, how does grandma like to be contacted? Text, video, in person. If you call ahead, you can talk to grandma in the best way possible for her. And then you can also contact her at a time when she's most likely to be in a good mood, as best as you can, right? And then you're being very specific. You're like, and you're talking about your child. You're not talking about grandma. You're specifically talking about your child. Like, Claire is really, we're working on Claire having a good relationship with her body, and we need you to, we need her to not hear anything about this. I am happy to listen to your diet. Now, you may not be happy to listen to her diet, in which case you don't have to say that. But if you're going to be okay with that, and it's not going to, mess up your relationship with food, you can say, you can tell me about your diet at a different time. You can tell me now, you can tell me after, you can tell me when she's playing outside, but please do not talk about your body or her body or what she's eating or whatever the issue is when she's here. And be really, really clear with this request.
Yeah, that's helpful. And, it makes me think too about us getting centered and grounded in where it is that we can advocate for our kids with regards to this topic. And I know that was a learning curve for me, was figuring out where I could respond to schools, for instance, like knowing that I could email the school nurse on the first day of school and say, hey, by the way, I want to opt my kids out of weight checks for this year, and be proactive about that. But if we don't have these conversations, then people don't always know that that's an option. So do you have other tips for how parents can create a more supportive, inclusive environment for their kids at school?
Yeah, I actually worked with some teachers and eating disorder therapists to create a nutrition toolkit for parents, because what we're hearing constantly is my kid is learning about healthy and unhealthy at school.
Yeah.
And again, we can't keep kids out of this. I think at one point I thought, well, if we can give kids a different framework, they're not going to absorb this healthy, unhealthy framework. I thought that until my kid came home and was like, hey, mom, is this a healthy food? And I was like, what? Where did this come from? I never taught you this. I'm looking at my husband. He's looking at me. He's like, which one of us did it? Like, neither of us. They're going to be exposed to it. I used to think, oh, if you raise them to not think of foods as different, like the candy and the broccoli would be on the same playing field. They're not, because when your kid is 5, they're going to go to gymnastics and they're going to reward the kids with candy. And all of a sudden they're going to be on a different playing field. So I think being grounded in reality is really important, because just like we don't want to have a black and white perspective of food, we also want to apply a black and white perspective to what is happening, say, in school.
Yeah.
Because that's also setting up the teacher or the school for failure too, because they're dealing with a lot. They have a lot of things going on. Mm-hmm. And so what we hear from families is they're learning healthy and unhealthy. And so we can tell parents, first of all, yeah, that's probably not the most helpful thing, but also it's not going to completely wreck your child.
Yeah.
Your child's going to hear this anyway. So, whatever. But if we can give teachers a different perspective, then it would be helpful. And I really believe, and research supports the idea that kids benefit from factual information, like information that they can use. This would look like carrots help you see in the dark. Like, that's interesting to a child. I'm not going to sit there and explain that they have beta carotene, which turns into vitamin A, which helps their night vision, right? I'm not going to explain that, but I can say carrots help you see in the dark, or bread helps you run fast, or chicken helps your muscles grow, or things like this. When we give kids information that they can use, what we are teaching them is different foods are going to do different things in our bodies. And we can tell them a cookie gives you energy. We don't have to draw distinctions and make these into categories of healthy and unhealthy. And to help parents, help teachers take a different approach, if they can, we created a curriculum, a unit study that is based on colors. So what do red foods do in your body? What do orange foods do in your body? Yellow, I'm not going to go through the rainbow here, but it's based on the idea that different colors are going to do different things in your body. And the more we learn from a nutrition science perspective, the more we know that those different colors really are the magic. They're the things that feed your gut microbiome. They're those different, they're called phytochemicals, if you want something. But those different chemicals in the foods that make them the different colors are what really make foods different from each other. And so we can give kids that understanding. Hey, different colors are going to do different things in your body. We're not just going to eat cookies, right? I mean, you don't have to say that, but we're not just going to eat cookies because that's one color. And we have, all these different colors. So that is what this unit study is based on. And it's also accompanied by, emails, scripts, like how do you contact your teacher? I think the trickiest thing with approaching teachers is when something has happened with your child, such as, the teacher saying, hey, your food is unhealthy, you can't bring muffins to school. And we do hear that a lot too. We have a lot of messages coming in, parents saying, they just told my child that their lunch is unhealthy. Like, what's wrong with a muffin that I made at home? Or I want them to enjoy a piece of candy with their lunch every day. And this is how we're helping our child have a really good relationship with food. And in those cases, you do have to contact the teacher and very, very respectfully say, hey, this is what my kids need. Can you help me understand, what are the rules in the classroom? What's going on? How is, why is this happening? And also either saying to your child, hey, I don't know why your teacher has this rule, but she does. And there's some places where we can eat certain foods and some places where we can't. This is not an unhealthy food. I think sometimes we're afraid to correct the teacher or the parent, to our child and say they're wrong. Sometimes it's appropriate to say, you know what, that's what she said, but this is what our family believes. We believe that this is healthy for you. This piece of chocolate is healthy. It's so healthy for us to be able to enjoy a piece of chocolate without guilt or even a second thought, really, to just enjoy it. And so sometimes we have to get involved with our kids, as well as asking the teacher, not to say anything to your child if they can help it.
And to your earlier point, it's just another fact that you then explain to your kid. At school, there is this rule. And so to be respectful of this situation that we go to, this place we go every day, we're going to follow that rule. And when we're at home, we don't have that rule. And here's why. Or that guideline, maybe rule is not the right word, but
right.
And I also appreciate your point that we're doing this in a really respectful way, because I know for folks who are working on their own recovery or who are in recovery themselves, sometimes it's hard to approach somebody else and advocate on behalf. Maybe we're feeling timid about it, but maybe we're going in swinging because there's this fear of what will happen if we don't. And so having those templates or those language suggestions available takes a little bit of the anxiety out of approaching that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we always have to remember people are doing their best.
Yes.
I like to assume the best. I like to assume the best of the teachers and the adults. Most people aren't in it to give your child disordered eating, right? And
right.
Your child is going to be exposed to a lot of things. So when we can actually relax and say, okay, my child is going to learn about healthy and unhealthy foods at school. I think we just need to acknowledge that reality. So the question is, how am I going to stay calm about it? How am I going to approach it when my child does have questions about it? How am I going to not demonize the teacher or the friend or whatever, because chances are somebody's going to tell your child their food is unhealthy. I mean, my kids have had it happen so many times. I'm like, their school doesn't even allow candy. I'm like, you just had some chocolate chips in your muffin. How is that?
Yeah.
I don't know how that's.
Yes.
So we're going to have these conversations, and it is tricky.
Yeah, and the resources as well on how to talk about nutrition, because on the other hand, as some people feel concerned about creating too much of a focus on nutrition, or then their kids become fixated on this, and it also turns into disordered eating. And so I like that there's evidence-based guidelines that say, carrots help you see in the dark, or if you're a little bit older, we can tell you about this other element and, deepen it from there, kind of peel the layers back, but in an age appropriate way.
Right. And I like the distinction between fixating on nutrition and not, because this is an area where, if your child all of a sudden is reading labels and is really obsessed with what are the foods that help you see in the dark, and then they only want to eat foods that help you see in the dark, or they only want food, they don't want to ever have foods that are just for fun or things like this, that is a sign that it's time to step back and say, you know what, maybe talking about what's in food is not a good thing for us right now. And that's okay too. There's plenty of research that supports the idea that kids don't have to learn what's in food. In fact, I wish that we didn't have to do any nutrition education. I think the reason we do is because they are getting all this diet culture, nutrition stuff, and we need to provide them with facts that are actually solid. But if for you or for your child, it is problematic to discuss what is in foods, even what they do in your body, it's perfectly okay and even justified in research literature that you can pull back and not say anything. And I'm in the process of writing a book, and there's research that supports just about any position that you could possibly take. And I think when we're thinking about how to do things in these tricky areas, like restricting sweets or allowing as many sweets as you want, or how to talk about food or pressuring kids, things like this. These are all touchy, and they can feel very scary.
Yeah.
I think we need to come back to ourselves and think, what is best for me? Because we have such a huge impact on our kids. How we feel about food, how we are coming to mealtime, the stresses we have. It's really important for us to be as healthy as possible. So if you're like, hey, talking about nutrition with my kids is really not good for my mental health, don't do it. It's fine. And if you're like, actually talking about nutrition with my kids is so helpful for me, then do it, right? Because your kid, they share some of the genetics, all sorts of things, and they may end up being a little bit like you. Of course, you never know, but it is one of those things where you showing up as best as you can is going to have a good impact on their nutrition and health. Even if it's like, oh, well, I didn't get to tell them about all the, have those nutrition conversations. That's okay. It's perfectly okay. You are not going to ruin your child by doing or not doing any of these things, truly.
Thank you. And congratulations on your book that's going to be coming out. When can we expect to see that?
I'm not exactly sure yet, honestly. But I did write a free guide on the 9 simple steps you can take to help your child have a good, solid relationship with food. It's really useful, and it kind of summarizes a lot of what I'll be talking about in the book. And then I'll be sending out, monthly emails just with thoughts on helping kids have a relationship with food. So if anybody's interested in that, kidseatingcolor.com/cookie is the website. You can get it free there. And then you can also I'll also announce the book via that email list.
All your platforms.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe we only have a couple minutes left here, but there is one other question I did want to ask, and you touched on picky eating a little bit. So I just want to ask for our community, because the question does come up a lot, is when would you recommend, what is picky eating and what is more towards ARFID or towards a place where we would really want to follow up with a specialist?
Yeah. So I have created a screener to help parents decide, is this something more or is it not? It's not going to diagnose anything. It's not going to diagnose ARFID, but it is going to take you to the point of we need to do something, or this is kind of borderline. And do you have any other red flags that might suggest this could get worse? If your child is losing weight or has any major nutrition issues, for sure, contact a provider right away. If your child's list of food is shrinking dramatically and we're down to 15, 10, 5 foods, that is not typical. Checking in with a healthcare provider is going to be really helpful. If you have a gut feeling that feeding your child is way harder than other kids and you're struggling, it's probably something. Now, whether it's into a very extreme situation or not, it may or may not be. But that's why I created the screener, to give parents a little more foundation of, what they're dealing with.
That's great. And we tell people too, if you have that gut feeling that anything is going on, that is the point at which you can reach out for support, because it is there. That's why ANAD's here, and that's why resources like Kids Eat in Color exist too. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was really great to connect and meet you.
You too.
All right. Thanks